Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting past the noise and really figuring out what's going on. Today, we're diving deep into the latest U.S. economic outlook, thinking mid-2025 and, what that means heading into 2026. We're looking closely at insights from board principal economist Natalie Gallagher. Her latest outlook, it shows a pretty significant pivot in the economy's direction. So our mission here is to pull out the most important bits from her analysis, give you a clear picture of this evolving economic landscape. The main theme seems to be, well, a slower, more vulnerable economy ahead.
Exactly. And we want to help you understand not just what's happening, but maybe more importantly, why it matters and how you can start preparing.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We've been sort of hearing about cautious optimism for a while, but this latest outlook, Gallagher's outlook, it sounds like it's really revealing a shift. What's really going on under the hood that's driving this move towards a slower, more vulnerable economy?
Well, the fundamental change is a definite move away from that earlier optimism. We're leaning much more cautious now. And the evidence is there. Real GDP, consumer spending, they're weakening. Think about this. The second estimate for Q1 real GDP, it has some significant downward revisions, especially, and this is key, in consumer spending.
Ah, okay. So not just a minor adjustment.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
It's more than just a statistical tweak. It's kind of a red flag. It suggests that the underlying strength in household spending, which is a huge engine for the economy, well, it might be eroding faster than we first thought. It signals maybe a deeper caution among consumers.
Right.
Now, on top of that, you got policy uncertainty. And the expected impacts of potential new tariffs. Those are really weighing things down.
So when you say policy uncertainty, you mean businesses are maybe hesitant?
Yeah, precisely. It's the ambiguity, Future regulations, trade deals, it makes businesses pause on big investments. And tariffs. Well, imagine you import parts, even a small tariff hike. It can ripple through the whole supply chain. Companies might have to raise prices or maybe squeeze their margins, and eventually that cost often gets passed down.
Okay, so it sounds less like just a forecast and more like a diagnosis based on what we're seeing right now. Was there one piece of data that really surprised you that kind of cemented this slowing trend?
That's a good question. I think, honestly, it was the depth of those downward revisions in consumer spending for Q1. It suggested something maybe more fundamental was shifting in household behavior than we initially thought, not just a temporary blip.
Okay, now the big question on, I think, everyone's mind, inflation. What's the forecast look like there? Are we finally getting some relief on prices?
Unfortunately, no. The forecast is that inflation is actually set to reaccelerate.
Reaccelerate. Oof.
Yeah. And the main reason seems to be higher input costs from tariffs. Those costs are working their way through supply chains right now. What's really important about this potential reacceleration compared to some of the earlier inflation pressures is how directly it's linked to things like tariffs.
Right. Policy-driven, almost.
Exactly. It's not just demand outpacing supply this time. It's more like a cost being pushed down from the top. And that often means more stubborn price increases. Businesses might have less wiggle room to absorb them, which, makes it a particularly tough kind of inflation for consumers to handle.
That definitely sounds like, as Gallagher put it, a painful thorn. So what does this reacceleration mean for, our own finances, real incomes, purchasing power?
Well, we're at what she calls a critical juncture. See, wage growth and business income, they've been somewhat resilient until now. But the expectation is that growth will wane as the year progresses. And as inflation picks up again and those tariff costs get passed on, well, purchasing power is definitely going to erode.
So any breathing room we felt might tighten up again.
That's the concern, yes.
Yeah.
It's likely to tighten significantly. Households could really start feeling the squeeze much more acutely on everyday budgets.
Okay, so inflation potentially reaccelerating, consumer spending weakening, that naturally leads to the labor market. We kept hearing how resilient it was for so long. But this outlook says that resilience is waning. What's really going on there?
Yeah, waning is a good word for it. When you dig into the details, the picture gets clearer. Job growth, it's actually pretty concentrated in just a few sectors, mainly healthcare and hospitality.
Ah, so not broad-based.
Exactly. And that's not ideal. It means the recovery isn't really spreading across all industries, leaves many still vulnerable. Plus, the actual pace of hiring, it has noticeably slowed over the last 12 to 18 months. And we're seeing things like labor force participation, the employment to population ratio, they're edging down. Slowly, but downwards.
But layoffs are still low, right?
Layoffs themselves are still historically low, yes, but here's the catch. Consumer sentiment data. It clearly shows that expectations for future layoffs are rising.
Okay, so people feel like layoffs might be coming, even if they aren't widespread yet.
Precisely. It's a subtle shift, but significant. We've seen before that while actual layoffs lag that sentiment, those expectations, they're often a leading indicator. People start adjusting their spending based on what they fear might happen, not just what's already happened.
Got it.
And this brings up a really important point for businesses, right? For HR, for workforce planning, what are the implications? It really signals a need to maybe rethink assumptions about wage pressure, about hiring costs. The ground is shifting. Just reacting isn't going to be enough.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. With these bigger economic trends as context, let's zoom in on one specific industry, consumer packaged goods, CPG. The outlook noted it faces downside pressure but not collapse. Can you flesh that out a bit? What's the nuance there?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. Downside, pressure, but not collapse. So the growth estimates for CPGs, they've been downgraded from about 4.6% down to 3.5%.
Still positive, but slower.
Right. Slower growth. But importantly, essentials, think food, personal care, those are expected to stay relatively stable. And that stability comes largely from underlying factors like demographic trends and population growth, and especially net international migration has been providing a bit of a cushion there.
Oh, so?
Well, think about it. More people, regardless of the economic climate, still need basic necessities. They need to eat, clean, take care of basic needs. That provides a sort of floor, some built-in resiliency for those core CPG categories.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the upside is limited because of that rising inflation we talked about and the uncertainty in the labor market.
Right. So connecting this back to the bigger picture, what kind of consumer behavior should we expect in the second half of the year?
We're likely looking at a more defensive consumer. That's the term being used.
Defensive meaning?
Meaning we anticipate continued cuts to discretionary spending. People focusing more on needs versus wants. We'll probably see more private label purchasing, store brands, and maybe smaller pack sizes as people try to manage their budgets.
Okay. And does this affect all consumers the same way?
No, and that's crucial. This idea of consumer segmentation is really important here. Inflation doesn't hit everyone equally. Lower income households, for instance, they feel rising food and fuel prices much more sharply. So they're likely the first to shift to private labels, smaller packs.
Right.
Higher income consumers. They might be more resilient overall, but even they might pull back on, say, premium or luxury CPG items or delay non-essential purchases. So businesses really need to understand these different impacts across their customer base, tailor their value messages, their product mix, demand for the core, essential stuff. That should hold up okay. But those premium, non-essential categories, they're likely facing some pretty strong headwinds.
Okay, so given this whole picture, the slowdown, the inflation, the cautious consumer, what should business leaders be doing, especially in CPG? How do they move from just reacting to being more proactive, setting up a better planning mindset?
Absolutely. Proactive is the key word. The recommendations are pretty clear. First, double down on value, especially with inflation potentially reaccelerating.
Value meaning just lower prices.
Not necessarily just lower prices. It means demonstrating tangible value, maybe through promotions, bundling, loyalty programs, things that really connect with a consumer who's watching every dollar. Second, it's crucial to optimize supply chains, specifically to try and offset some of those tariff impacts.
How does optimizing help with tariffs?
Well, optimizing isn't just about speed or efficiency anymore. It's about resilience and cost mitigation. It might mean looking at diversifying suppliers, maybe sourcing from different countries, perhaps even reshoring some production, or negotiating different terms with current suppliers. Basically, finding ways to absorb or sidestep those extra costs before they have to be passed on to the consumer.
Got it. Smart. What else?
Third, really focus on consumer segmentation, like we just discussed, because not all consumers are feeling this the same way. You need different approaches for different groups. And finally, maybe the most critical piece, prioritize scenario planning.
Scenario planning, meaning thinking about different what-ifs.
Exactly. Having multiple scenarios and playbooks ready. It helps you avoid making reactive, rushed decisions when things change. It's not just about having a plan B, it's about stress testing your assumptions. What if tariffs go higher? What if consumer spending drops further? What if input costs spike? Running those what-ifs helps you understand potential impacts on everything from raw materials to sales forecasts. It lets you make strategic pivots instead of just, panicking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It really shifts the focus from just reacting to what already happened to actively anticipating what could happen and using tools, I guess, that connect those real-time economic signals with your own internal data to test ideas, simulate outcomes, so that planning confidence isn't just aspirational, but actually becomes common practice.
That's the goal, absolutely.
Okay, so let's just recap the main message here from Natalie Gallagher's Outlook. It seems pretty clear the economic path has shifted. We're looking at a period that's more sluggish, maybe more vulnerable than we thought.
Yes, that's the headline. But, and this is important, the empowering part is that with the right insights like these and with proactive smart planning, business leaders can adapt. They can navigate this landscape effectively. It's not necessarily doom and gloom, but it does require adjustment.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Given these insights, how might you specifically adapt? Maybe your personal budget or perhaps your team's planning strategies at work. How can you embrace more of that what-if mindset instead of just reacting to what happened? What assumptions might you need to rethink now?
And just remember, these economic insights, they're constantly being updated. Natalie Gallagher's ongoing work at Board, for example, is a really valuable resource for staying plugged into these shifts as they continue to unfold. It's a dynamic situation.